Hey everyone, Matt Thomas here. Thanks for watching. So if you're watching this video first, like you haven't seen the other essay videos, I would highly suggest watching the first one. I think I titled it "Watch This First" or something like that. It's the intro, maybe like very important lesson, and maybe titled that. Because that video kind of establishes the foundation of having your students enjoy poetry. If you're thinking, like, if you're looking through the list of videos and the essay one caught your eye right away and you thought, oh, I'm going to implement an essay for a week, second semester or whatever. Again, I'd highly suggest watching the video, the intro video first, and maybe doing some of the other poetry lessons first before doing this essay. I feel like that's going to establish, like I said, the foundation of enjoyment for poetry rather than just jumping right into the poetry analysis essay. So let me get right into this. This poetry analysis essay is going to be focusing on The Raven and Annabel Lee. Now, I will tell you, the essay is not about The Raven and Annabel Lee, but those two poems set up what the essay is going to be about. It's a 4 to 5 day lesson plan. It'll take you an academic week, maybe even a couple extra days, depending on your students and how long they take to write essays or how long you want to spend on The Raven and Annabel Lee. I would highly suggest not spending too much time on the poems because sometimes that can be a little challenging to keep students motivated if you're analyzing poetry, no matter how enjoyable the poems may be. So let me set this up. This will be a longer video, just giving you a heads up because this sets up like the whole 5-day unit. All right, so to begin this, I like to essentially analyze The Raven and Annabel Lee, and I do it in kind of a fun game show, and I'll show you that in a second. If you've seen my first video, the one that says "Watch This First," you know that I feel that it's very difficult to analyze poetry, to get a proper analysis of a poem, if you don't know what's going on in the author's life while that person was writing the poem and what has been going on historically in the author's life. I think that by knowing those two aspects of an author's life, it'll more accurately allow you to analyze a poem. Like, what was the purpose of the poem? Were they just getting paid for it? Or was there a personal purpose behind the writing of the poem? What has been established in the author's life first before the poems were written that'll allow that author to kind of see that perspective? Do we trust the author, right? Like, going through really emotional times. We know that some of the best poetry is written when someone's going through an emotional time in their life. But that could also kind of like skew how a person can see he or she's reality. I don't know if that made sense. Sorry. When you go through a very emotional time, sometimes people tend to focus more negative aspects of their life or so on. Do we trust the author, right? Their authenticity at the time. Anyway, that all being said, let me go into this. So the setup of this poetry analysis essay is essentially the prompt is going to be that a person's history, an author's history, or what's going on in the time, the author's real life, influences the poetry that he or she writes. So that's the purpose of it. Let me show you the prompt of this essay, and then we can get into the analysis of Raven and Annabel Lee. So here's the prompt that the students will be writing kind of on day 2, because it only takes 1 day to set this essay up. So write a research-based informational essay about the relationship between a poet's real-life experiences and his or her poetry. How did the author's life events influence his or her poetry? And please present examples of that influence with specific support from author's poetry. Now, I'm going to explain this prompt later, and I'm going to explain where this came from. So that being said, let me show you. This is day 1. This is day 1 of what I do. So I like to use game shows a lot. It creates dopamine with students. They come into class. As soon as I say, hey, Joey, can you drop the lights, please? They know, ooh, something's going on. And most likely it's going to be a game show. And I've done these game shows in the past. If you've seen, I have a video out there about the game shows. I'm sure you might have seen that. If not, feel free to watch that. This is what I do. So I'll be like, okay, Joey, drop the lights get down. And I say to the class, let's play the newest game that's sweeping the nation. And then I project this, and then they all say in unison, let's look at the ups and downs of Poe's life. Not Poe the Kung Fu Panda or Poe the Teletubby, but Edgar Allan Poe, the famous poet who didn't even know it, unless he did know it. I don't know. You'd have to ask him. I'm craving Taco Tuesday. So yeah, with my game shows, they tend to be long intros. I tend to write them for my enjoyment, my humor, and the students do tend to enjoy them too. So this is how I set it up, and then what I do is I say, okay, we're going to look at Edgar Allan Poe's life. He had a lot of ups and downs, and I make this game show interactive. I say when I share something positive about Poe's life, as the audience all together say yay, and when I show something negative, all together say oh. So here it is. We'll do the quick version of it. So I'll tell the class, all right, Poe was born in 1809, giving his parents and the world an incredible author. Yay! Poe's parents die 3 years later. Aww. Poe's adopted by a rich family. Yay! His adopted parents disown him. Aww. Before they disown him, they send him to a great college. Yay! With only enough money to cover a third of the expenses. Aww. Poe figures out a way to get money for college. Yay! It was gambling and he lost everything and had to drop out of college. Aww. He meets a girl and gets engaged. Yay! Only to find out that she was engaged to someone else. Aww. He gets his life back together by enlisting in the army and gets accepted to West Point. Yay! Only to be thrown out 8 months later. Aww. Poe goes home to be with his extended family. Yay! Only to be robbed by a cousin. Aww. He meets a girl and legitimately falls in love. Yay! It's his 13-year-old cousin, he's 27 at the time, whom he met when she was 7 years old. Aww. They share a strong love for each other and he finally feels secure in his life. Yay! She dies 5 years later of tuberculosis. Aww. After months of destructive living, he becomes engaged to another woman. Yay! Only to die on the way to see her. Kind of his fault. Oh, if you know Poe's history and how he passed away, that would make sense. Oh yeah, and the girl he was going to marry was his first fiancée, the one who was already engaged at the time. But because of his lifelong tragedies, we have the Raven. Yay! So imagine like doing that and your students are getting interactive and they're yelling and they're, having fun, with the presentation that you're giving. So that's how I start the class, whether it's on a Monday or so, it might be on a Tuesday, depending on the time frame. And so that's how I begin the class. So the students have seen like the history of Poe and seen his ups and downs. Now that's very important for me to get a proper analysis of the Raven. I'm going to say this respectfully. Feel free to email me if you'd like. But I feel that sometimes respectfully that the Raven doesn't get as deep of an analysis as it should, because to really understand the Raven, we have to know the history of Poe's life and what was going on at the time that he wrote the Raven. That'll allow us as a class, right, our students, to get a more kind of accurate analysis. And then looking at Annabel and what's going on at the time of his life, that will allow us to get a more accurate analysis. That's the purpose of the essay the students are going to be writing later on. So let's get back into this. So I start the day showing that game show. It takes 3 minutes. A little bit longer than what we just did together because the students are like, yay, getting into it. Then I show them the Simpsons version of the Raven. Here's the YouTube, link to it. So I show them the Simpsons version of the Raven, and I think that's important because the Raven can be challenging with the language, as But if the students see the Simpsons version of the Raven in advance, it helps them understand a little better. It only goes about 4 minutes or so. Then we analyze the Raven. And so I've given you the link here. This is an abbreviated version of the Raven. I think I took a few stanzas out, mainly for brevity and for the stanzas kind of repeated themselves. So I'll pass out this handout to the students. I'll make copies of it and then pass it out to the students. And I will ask them to mark on it. So, and I'll have this overhead right now projected on the screen. I used to have it on the old school overhead and we'd mark on it. But if you have a Promethean board or a smart board, you can just do it there. But this is, if you're not looking at the slideshow, if you don't mind looking for a second, this is what I have the students write at the very top. I put that Poe wrote this while his wife was dying. So I have them write that, and I make sure I establish it right away, that what's going on in an author's life at the time will have a great influence on the poem that author's writing. and historically, what the person has gone through in the past will have a great impact holistically on their poetry. I think that's very, very important to establish. So that this video is not an hour and a half long, I will not be analyzing the Raven for you. If you're an English teacher, you're like, we get it, we teach the Raven. But I will say this: I'm gonna throw some things out there for you as far as the Raven. That if you've taught the Raven before and you have not seen it from the perspective of how I'm going to share it with you, maybe look at it a little bit. Maybe it'll give you a chance to kind of like see Raven from a different perspective than you've taught before, or maybe it's exactly how you taught. But I'll say this. So this is how I have my students view it. So we go through line by line, once upon a midnight dreary, and we establish the tone like it's sad. I have them underline certain lines, sadness and so on. So a lot of the theme of sadness and how he wants to forget his wife. He's trying to like, can I just drink this drink and forget my wife? And so I established right away, why does he want to forget his wife? This is the love of his life. Why is he asking to forget? And then he sees this Raven. And so let me go to the other side. So this Raven comes to him and is kind of reminding him of things and like poking at his subconscious, his consciousness, and like prodding and stuff and making him angry and all these things. So, and as we're getting into the second part of the Raven, you can see how he's like, can you just leave, Raven? Raven's like, no, I'm not going to. He's like, can I just forget my wife? And he's like, no, you're not going to forget her. And so it's almost like this guilt. So I established, and I'm giving the fast version, of course. I'm establishing that he feels guilty about something. And the students are like, what? His wife's dying. I'm like, okay, good. But look at his, not good. That didn't come out right. His wife's dying. Yes, that's true. Let's look at the history of Poe. Historically, in Poe's life, anyone that's come into his life has left his life. So we know that, right? He's feeling it. His wife's leaving him, of course, just like everybody else has done. He even references that in a line of the poem. But everybody that's been in his life, bad things tend to happen to them. And so he may have a sense of guilt because he's trying to forget what's going on with his wife. He's trying to forget that pain. But he also asks, like, does she go to heaven? And he's like, no. And the Raven says no. And she's like, what? He gets angry at her. And then he asks, am I going to heaven? And the Raven says no. And the last two stanzas say that. And the Raven says no. So he's almost, I'm establishing this with the students, feeling that he's feeling guilty about something. Maybe he feels like he's the one that's killing his wife. Because if he's not going to heaven, there's just a certain things that you can do to not be allowed to heaven. One of them is murder, philosophically. And so he feels like he's maybe killing his wife. Now, before you go, wait, what are you talking about? Murdering his wife? No, he might feel like anyone that's come into his life, bad things happen to him. So she's in his life. He's feeling guilty about it. And so he feels like it's his fault, essentially. And so on and so forth. So that's how I established the Raven. Now, again, that's the super short version of it. But if you haven't seen it from that perspective, maybe look at it, because historically, everyone that's come into his life, bad things have happened and they've left him alone. And keep in mind, at the time, his wife is dying while he's writing this. So, of course, you see the religious reference and how he's angry at a higher power, which is very common when he's not sure what's going on and why he can't save his wife, right? He's not a doctor. He can't save her. So he's feeling guilty, like it's his fault that she's dying. So if you look at Raven from that perspective, it might be a new perspective that you've never seen before. Okay, so let me fast forward. So we spend... no joke, 15 minutes on the Raven, 20 minutes. Again, the learning arc. We've talked about the learning cycle. Don't spend too much time than you need to, because you don't want to bore the students to death. Even if they're enjoying it, too much of anything's too much, right? So you're establishing that what an author has gone through and what an author's going through can set the tone or can influence the poetry at the time. Raven's very dark, very sad. He feels very guilty, etc. So let's then look at Annabel Lee. And again, I do these two poems, and this is still day one. I pass out Annabel Lee. It's a much shorter poem, and I say right away, you're going to see the difference in tone right away. So I have the students write this down at the very top of Annabel Lee. Poe wrote this after his wife had died. So keeping that in mind, because in The Raven, it's very dark and depressing. Annabel Lee is a much lighter, like, hey, Kingdom by the Sea, my wife, my love of my life, she's amazing. Oh, but the angels were still jealous. Like, you can tell there's still an anger with Poe, right? He's still angry at a higher power, which isn't going to go away anytime soon, right? So keeping in mind, he did write Annabel Lee after his wife had died. So maybe there's a sense of relief. Again, we won't analyze the poem. We don't want to take forever doing this. If you probably have done this before anyway, but you can sense the angry tone, but also like a relief, like, hey, he's definitely not so much sad and depressed any longer. He takes more control, like, hey, I'm the one in control. She's my soulmate. There's nothing you can do to take her away from me. And then we get to the last stanza. And this is where I kind of go along with the students there. I'm like, look, he, in the last stanza, literally opens her tomb and lies down next to her, like literally by her side, and just waits. It doesn't say anything about him going back or visiting her every night. He literally just opens the tomb, crawls down, just holds on to her and just stays there. And so I go to this thing of like, hey, maybe he's just waiting to die. And they're like, ooh, you mean he's next to her body, holding on to her, like her corpse? And I'm like, hey, that's what it says right there. And keeping in mind, he wrote this after his wife had died. He feels a sense of relief, a sense of control. He's trying to get back control in his life, and he's just kind of waiting for him to die, right? Waiting to die next to her. And so I talk about with the students, like, is that creepy or romantic? And they're like, ew, creepy. And others like, actually, it's kind of romantic, right? So anyway, that's what I established with the students. Again, the purpose is that what's going on at the time of the poet's life has an influence over the poetry at that time. So analyzing The Raven and then looking at the difference with Annabel Lee. So anyway, that being said, we're done with that. That takes day one. And again, don't spend too much time on it. And then I give the prompt, and that closes out the class. That's the timing of the class. So this is the prompt, and I explain to the students this is what they're going to be writing about. Write a research-based informational essay about the relationship between a poet's real-life experiences and his or her poetry. How did the author's life events influence his or her poetry? Which means there's going to be some research with this. Not some. There's going to be a lot of research with this essay. Please present examples of that influence with specific support from the author's poetry. So they need to go into the poetry and find specific support for what you're trying to argue. Now, here's the thing. If you've seen my other videos, you know I'm a big believer in teaching poetry through the most popular forms of poetry, which is music, songwriting, etc. So what I do is I tell the students that when I say author's what a poet's real life, they can use what we would consider like a standard poet, Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, etc., or they can look at their favorite musician, like songwriter and so on. Because I think it's important for the students to have choice, because if they have choice, they have buy into what they're doing. Now, if this prompt looks familiar, this was the prompt for, if you remember a few years ago, back in the day, the district benchmark essays. This was, I think, the second semester district benchmark essays. And we gave the students Emily Dickinson. So the students had to research Emily Dickinson and then write an essay about Emily Dickinson's, how her real life influenced her poetry. Now, again, if you like Emily Dickinson, you're going to enjoy it. If not, it's going to be, just a chore, a challenge. And so I would tell the students, choose anyone you like, any author. That includes musicians. That gets people excited. I will hold off on maybe having a student research their favorite band, because then you have to research who writes the songs in there, but they could do that too. And I always tell the students, remember, what goes on in a person's real life can influence what the person writes. So the research is you have to find out if the musician actually wrote the song. Right? So a lot of musicians out there, respectfully, even if they say they write their music, they don't always write their own stuff. So you have to find songs they actually wrote or experiences that they went through first, and then the songs that reflected that. So that's what I tell the students. Here's an extended prompt for students that want a little more explanation about this. I pretty much have just added this line here. And I tell the students, look, you're going to have to infer the relationship between the experience and the poem, because we don't know. Even Google he might be able to Google an interview with the author, but the reality is the author, the poet, the songwriter might just be saying anything, right, off the top of their head, whatever they were going through at the time. We have to trust that what the author was going through is authentic. We don't always know that because we tend to remember experiences differently. So the students are kind of inferring a lot of what's going on. So like a psychologist could like analyze a person, but again, unless you're in the person's brain, you don't really truly know what's going on. etc. So I always say that, like, don't stress, because analysis is the most difficult part of essay writing, because just the brain development, right? Long-term analysis, that's very, very challenging, especially if like ninth or 10th grade or so on. So as I always tell the students, as long as they do their best at the analysis part, they'll do okay grade-wise. So here's the essay in 4 simple steps. First, the students need to choose a poet or a singer, somebody that they already know about. It makes it so much easier. Research the happenings in that person's real life or themes that are constant throughout their poetry. I'll give you examples later on. And beware that not all singers write their own music. I mentioned that too. Like, it's important because you might like the song, but another songwriter might have written it for that artist, you know? Find songs or poems that reflect that experience, and then write your essay commenting about how those experiences influence the person's poetry. And you might have to refer that relationship between the experience and the lyric, because again, we don't really know. We can't get inside the author's head, and we honestly aren't sure if we trust what the author was feeling at the time, because when emotional things happen, they can really skew our reality. Anyway, here's some examples. So Taylor Swift writes a lot of songs about her breakups. And so maybe the essay is going to be about Taylor Swift and how her relationships have influenced her music. And so one paragraph might be about a John Mayer song, one about Joe Jonas, and one about Taylor Lautner. Eminem, if you know Eminem, he writes a lot about his relationship with his mother, his ex-wife, and his daughter. So maybe their 3-body paragraphs will be one song about his mother, his ex-wife, and his daughter. Or if you know Motley Crue, Nikki Sixx was pronounced legally dead for 2 minutes from a heroin overdose, but then he woke up, and so he wrote an entire album about that experience. So I tell the students they can write 3 different paragraphs about 3 different experiences, a paragraph about a different experience each time, or 3 paragraphs about one experience, just, a different song to reflect that. Hopefully that made sense. Here's an example of what someone had written in the past. They talked about Ed Sheeran and his experiences throughout, how he reflects on his experiences as poetry. And they had one paragraph was about the A-Team. Here's what the experience was about. Here's the lyric that supports that. One was about supermarket flowers. Here's the experience that influenced that song, and then or poem. And then here's the lyric that supports that. And then "Give Me Love" is the third poem, third paragraph. There's the experience that influenced that song, and then there's the lyric that supports that. So again, what the students are doing is making an argument. Giving an example of it, explaining the relevance of how that example relates to the argument, and then giving the long-term inference or significance or impact to their best of their ability. So hopefully that made sense, right? Hopefully I was able to explain it in a way that made sense. And then of course you can obviously adjust this however you'd like. Here's an example. I always give the example. I put this on Google Classroom or Canvas, whatever you use. Here's an example of what a decent essay looks like. So you can give that to your students as well. The students really do, I'm not exaggerating, they kind of enjoy writing this essay because they're writing about their favorite band or favorite musician or poet or songwriter or whatever. And they're researching about the poet's real life. Quite honestly, the writing part comes a lot easier for them if they're doing it with something that they enjoy. The final thing, and then in this video, I tell the students in advance, look, the essay is going to be graded mainly on format. So let me talk some neuroscience in this for a second. So the most difficult part of writing an essay, what tends to be, teachers notice this, is the explanation and the analysis. Really the analysis, that's the 2 parts, explanation and significance. The reason being is that part of the brain does not fully develop in a person's life until their late 20s, early 30s, which is why people who go back to college tend to write essays much easier. So 9th grade is always a challenge. 10th grade is always a challenge. Now, as a teacher, us knowing that allows us to kind of like be a little more patient with the students, right? 11th and 12th grade, they start to get better at it. And so I'm a big believer in format. If I can have my 9th graders memorize format, the Axes writing format, etc., if I can have them memorize it, and practice their analysis. By the time they get to 10th, 11th, 12th grade, if they have their formula memorized, the teacher can now focus on developing that analysis part, not so much spending a lot of time on Axes format. So I'm a big believer, if you're a 9th grade teacher, focus on format. Try to make that as easy as possible with students. Get them to memorize that formula. Do sentence starters if you need to, because the analysis part of the brain is not fully developed yet, and it honestly won't be fully developed for a long time. So allow the students to know the formula, plug and play, and then plug in place, I should say, put information in place. And then once their brain starts to get better at analysis, 11th, 12th grade, then they already have the formula memorized. Anyway, so this is what I tend to do. I tell them, as long as the effort is there based on analysis, which is easy for us as teachers to tell, then they'll do well with their grade. I don't punish them because like their brain not being fully developed is not punitive. Like, hey, your brain's not developed, you're going to get a C. Like, no, not at all. Of course, they can still earn an A as long as the format's there and the effort is there to show some analysis. They tried. So last thing, and I do, I have been accused of like, Matt, you make essays a little too easy for students. I'm like, good, because that's a compliment for me. Because again, parts of the brain are not fully developed yet. So I try to give as many sentence starters as possible so they can memorize these things. That's why teachers always complain about intro paragraphs and conclusion paragraphs. Students don't know how to write thesis. They don't know how to do intro paragraphs. It's because that part of the brain doesn't find intro paragraphs relevant. I've talked about that in other videos, but I'll do a brief summary. If you ever find that your students have a hard time writing intro paragraphs, have them memorize a formula, because our brain doesn't retain things that it finds unimportant. It just doesn't, did I say that right? Our brain doesn't remember things that it doesn't find important for survival. We don't speak in intro paragraphs. Like I don't walk up to you and be like, hi, my name is Matt. We're about to talk about barbecues and ninjas and football. We don't do that. We walk up and say, hey, what's up? And then we just start talking. So to write something that is foreign to us, our brain just goes, why do I need to memorize that? So please be patient if your students don't memorize intro paragraphs or don't remember how to write one. It's not your fault. It's not the fault of previous teachers. We've all taught intro paragraphs and thesis statements. The reality is we don't use them daily, and so our brain doesn't find it too important to remember. Anyway, so I give them a formula. You can look at the formula. I won't spend time going over it, but essentially it's, 3-lined intro paragraph. You can teach intros however you'd like. And then I give examples of intro paragraphs. I say, hey, if you follow my sentence starters perfectly, verbatim, and you just stick your own information in there, it's probably going to be a B essay, right? But if you take it and attempt to make it your own and attempt to make it better, just don't, just stay within the formula, there's a chance you'll get an A. Then I talk about the axis paragraph. I give a lame example just to know that my students aren't copying because it's such a lame example. You can read it if you'd like, but it follows step by step. And then I give things on like what don't to say. Don't say it was the person's experience had a great impact on the author's writing. Like, duh, that's what the essay is about. So don't say that in your significance. As long as the attempt of analysis is good, the attempt is there, they'll earn it. They'll earn a good grade. And I'm not against giving A's on essays, especially in 9th grade, as long as the effort is there, the format is perfect, and they tried analysis, right? Here's an example of a body paragraph. You can see that I bolded the assertion. And you get the idea. I don't need to explain this to you. You can see this. I give that to the students as an example, and I say, just follow what that person does. And then examples of some conclusions. And again, the reason that conclusions are difficult for students to remember is the same reason why intro paragraphs are. After we're done with the conversation, we tend to just leave, right? We don't go, as I've clearly stated, which never started a conclusion that way anyway, but we don't say like, yeah, we just talked about barbecue and ninjas and football. Like we don't do that. So our brain doesn't remember concluding paragraphs. They don't find writing concluding paragraphs very important, so it doesn't remember that. Again, the brain deletes things it doesn't find relevant for survival. Anyway, I know that was a long video. If you have any questions on this at all, please let me know. I know this is a long video, but it does set you up for the next 4 to 5 or 6 days. Hopefully you enjoyed. Thanks.